Hey friends, what's up? This is Metro, and today we're gonna talk about the 5 biggest mistakes you and I do to lose Deadlock games. And I think if you follow the tips in this video, you will climb drastically. A lot of stuff in here is stuff that I see people, even in Eternus, do wrong. We're gonna go from like the easiest things to fix to the hardest. Once we get like later down the line, once we get to like tip 3, 4, 5, I see these mistakes in every single rank basically. We're gonna talk a lot about macro. If you guys don't know what macro is in Deadlock, macro is basically your decisions in the entire game. When should you fight? When should you farm? When should you push? When should you play safe? That is macro. And micro is more so, you know, your mechanics, your aim in fights. But the thing about Deadlock, it is a mix of a MOBA and a shooter, but macro is the one thing that will win you games. You can be very mediocre at aiming, you can be very mediocre at ability usage. If you macro correctly, I truly believe you can get to the highest rank in the game, Eternus. And the number one thing I see that people do wrong is farming too much. When I say farming too much, I mean people farm jungle, especially on their own side, too much. And this is a mistake all the way from Initiate to Eternus, okay? It is always more valuable to farm creeps on the lane than it is to farm the jungle. Farming creeps feels really good, right? If you're like a fast farmer, let's say you're like an Infernus or a 7, hitting the safes on your side or farming a tier 2 camp real quick. But if you do the math, on average in the game, one creep on the lane is worth 100. Over time it increases, the longer the game goes, the more money you get from everything. But one creep wave is worth 400. And most tier 2 camps are worth way less, okay? So a creep camp, a tier 2 creep camp at the start of the game is worth around 80 times 3. So that is 240, okay? Barely above half. So if you were to farm a tier 2 creep camp, instead of one wave that you're missing on a lane, you're losing you and your team around 160 souls. Not only that, it is also that if you push waves, you force the enemy to react, you force the enemy to go to certain lanes to defend, and if they don't, you also get more objectives, you get more map space. Let's say you are solo laning on the yellow lane, and the laning stage is over. Let's say you killed the enemy tower, and your tower is also down, the enemy guardian, right? So let's say the guardians don't exist anymore, and there is a creep wave pushing towards your walker. If you decide to go and defend this walker, you will get a lot of money and you will protect your walker. When should you not do that? It is probably not worth farming those waves if there's already another person on your team on that wave. If you guys don't know how creep sharing works, if you are on the lane with another player after 8 minutes, the creeps get shared and you only get, currently in the current patch, 60% of the gold. Then it is obviously more worth to go for, like, if you're in position, to go for a creep camp instead. That way you get the 240 or something from, like, let's say a tier 2 camp, and your ally gets the full 400, let's say, make it simple, 400 from one full creep wave, right? Whereas if you both sat on the lane, that means you get 60% of the 440 souls in total, which means you and your ally both get like around 220, right? So in this case, it is obviously 240 plus 400 for your team is worth more than stacking with your ally and farming those creep camps. So TLDR for tip number 1, stop farming your jungle. You will not get ahead farming your jungle, okay? It is expected of your team to have someone farm the jungle, and if all 4 lanes are occupied, let's say every single lane is occupied by one of your teammates, there will be 2 people that will roam around, help their teammates, or farm the jungle, and then it's totally cool. But I see it so much where people just go from jungle camp to jungle camp. You all had those players on your team, maybe you are the player, that player on your team. Pushing out lanes and getting teamfight wins early is gonna net you way more gold and also way more of a like advantage in general, right? Let's say you're farming the lane and you get up to, let's say, the enemy walker and you get an early walker kill. What happens is the entire side of the map opens up, right? It is pretty safe to farm this area of the map as well. And this is an area of the map that the enemy occupies, right? There's one creep camp here, there's one creep camp here, there's safes here. Let's say you also get the walker on green lane here. The area of the map that you control is way bigger, right? And that is not even mentioning all the other benefits that killing the walker gives you. The walker gives you 500 gold plus extra, I think it's 750 in total, and everyone on the team gets those souls, right? So it's a like it's around a 2,500 soul swing for just killing the walker. But then suddenly you have this entire area of the map that you control on the enemy side that the enemy can't control. And suddenly the enemy has to play back, push out the lanes that way. And I consider this very basic in Deadlock. And it might sound very basic to you, but trust me, this all is going to make sense the more we get into this video. Tip number 2, in my opinion, is more so a mistake I see lower rank to mid rank players do. It also happens in high rank, but a lot of people play reactively instead of actively. Think of Deadlock as like a kind of a chess game, okay? You have to think ahead and make the next step. If the enemy already planned something and you just react, it's usually pretty bad. Let me give you a very basic example of what that would look like on the map. Let's say you are just minding your own business, farming your side, right? Pushing out lanes, and the enemy is pushing S2 down the yellow lane, okay? And they're getting close to your walker. If the enemy gets to where my cursor is here, on the pink side, a lot of the time, even if you rotate now and you get there and try to defend the walker, it's gonna be too late and they get the walker for free. So you wanna think ahead. If the enemy is allowed to get this far onto your side of the map, what that suddenly means is they can also have more options, right? They can push it all the way, back off, and then do something else with that time. Like, for example, they push it up, and then they start and rotate and push the green lane as well, or gank, get a kill, right? And then they can rotate into mid, right? But this is only one example. This also applies to items. A lot of people look at what the enemy has, and they buy counter items. The enemy has a bebop and he's very scary. He's doing like double bomb bebop. I see a lot of people instantly rushing something like debuff remover. And that seems really good on paper, right? Like, oh, if the enemy bebop stacks you and you buy debuff remover, suddenly you're fine, right? That is, in most cases, the incorrect play. Why is that? Items that you buy reactively, that keep you safe, passive items, that keep you like alive, like debuff remover, will not help you if you don't have any damage items, if you can't deal damage back. What point is there to buy something like debuff remover if you can't kill the bebop after anyways, right? The bebop is just gonna laugh at you. He's gonna put the bombs at you, you buy debuff remover, but then you do like 1 damage a second, and in the long run he's still gonna kill you. Let's say you're in the mid game and you don't really have a lot of damage items, it is worth way more getting a few damage items up so you can actually do something against the enemy and kill them, rather than to rush a defensive item really early, right? Reactive items is bad, and I would rather be worried about getting your build up and then worry about actually countering the enemy. Let's say the enemy has a haste, right? To make it simple, and the haste is really farmed on the enemy team and she does a lot of bullet damage. You think about buying something like metal skin, okay? Most builds in the game, usually like the top 5 options, are really good as long as they're not all time. All time usually means the build hasn't been updated in a while. So let's say I started laning and I came out of lane like even or a bit ahead, and I'm working on my build right now, right? I have some farming items. I'm at barely 10k. This should be probably around like 10 minutes in the game, maybe 12 to 14 minutes depending on what your rank is. And now you go into a lane and the enemy kills you with a haste. They press ult, and then you're like, oh, guess I need metal skin. A lot of players at this point would go and buy this defensive item right now. And that is objectively the wrong play. Because at this point, we really don't have a lot of damage ourselves, and it doesn't matter if we can stop the enemy haste from ulting us or stop the enemy haste from dealing bullet damage to us for a few seconds, if after I still can't kill her and she's still gonna end up killing me, right? So in this situation, you really wanna invest a bit more and get your build up a bit more to a certain point where you feel comfortable dealing enough damage, and then you can start worrying about buying defensive items. And this is why I have in most of my builds utility items as needed, because these are items I tend to buy really like later down the line, and they're like listed after mid game, because I'm really trying to get my core build up. Don't get me wrong, like sometimes there are scenarios where I don't fully finish the mid game build, and I buy like some spirit armor early when I realize, oh, wait, holy shit, everyone on the enemy team is dealing a massive spirit damage, right? Then it's worth it. But against like a single bebop, if I, at this point, before getting Burst Fire or like my core like snowball item, if I were to rush debuff remover, I'm destroying the game. Because there's also 5 other players on the team. Like what in specific you need. And usually you pick an item that is useful against multiple characters. So let me give you an example. Let's say the enemy has a haze and a pocket. You could buy debuff remover to remove the pockets in affliction, or you could buy metal skin to remove the enemy haze's ult damage or reduce the enemy ult damage by quite a lot. But in that situation, I would probably go for something like Ethereal Shift. Why? Because it kind of works against both, right? Like, I can still Ethereal Shift and live through the Haze ult, and if I time Ethereal Shift correctly, I can also, like, dodge the Pocket ult. Number 3 is playing too safe when you're behind. Let's say you have a laning stage and it goes kind of bad for your team, right? Let's say the enemy is ahead a few thousand after laning stage, and it's looking kind of bleak. The lanes are pushed towards you. What a lot of players do, and this goes for every rank, okay? A lot of players play safe. They're so worried about dying because they already died so much. They're so worried about the enemy getting more money that they will just sit in their jungle and farm their safe jungle camps, right? Like, because they're worried that, oh, as soon as I walk a bit further, right, and if I try to get this guardian, I might die. As long as your team plays that way, if you play too safe, you will fall more and more behind, and there's going to be 0% chance you will win the game. You need to play the complete opposite. The more behind you are, the riskier you have to play. You have to accept the fact that you're behind. In order to make up for the deficit, you will have to kill enemies, you will have to get objectives, and you will have to farm enemy creep camps. And they will just have more access to your side of the map because they're ahead. And you can't really avoid that, but what do you do to counter it? Again, the incorrect play is to play safe, only sit on the towers, wait until the creeps come in. Why? Because as long as you do that, if everyone on your team does that, the enemy will farm more creeps, they will farm your jungle, they will just get ahead and ahead in souls, and you will fall more and more behind, they'll get more walkers, and this is usually the games that lead to like a 5-minute stomp or like, 15-minute stomp. Or how do we play from behind? We play more aggressive. What does that mean? How can you play more aggressive? You're behind, so you're more likely to lose team fights, right? So you want to look for more favorable traits. Let's assume your team knows this concept too, or you explain it to your team. You could decide to group up with a teammate as 2 and just push a tower, right? And on the other side of the map, you can tell your other teammate to also push this tower, right? And suddenly the enemy has to make the choice of like, do we want to stop this tower? Or do we want to stop this tower, right? And the more pressure you put on the enemy, even if you're behind, the more the enemy has to make choices and the more likely they are to fuck up. If you never push out and you don't force any fights, the enemy never has to make any choices, so it's very simple for them, straightforward, right? They farm the entire map until they're so far ahead that they can't lose fights anymore. What I like to do also is push side lanes alone and try to go for objectives. In this scenario, right, like let's say the enemy's ahead and they're so ahead that they stack up as like 3 or 4, right? And they start pushing your blue walker. And if I'm around here, I start aggressively pushing for the walker. And a lot of the time I get it. But even if I don't get it, right? Let's assume I push this lane and suddenly the enemy rotates back, right? They leave, they rotate back and they kill you. They send like 3 people to kill you on this walker. This was still probably a good trade for you. Why? You probably got some tower on the walker, you probably got some damage on the walker, and you also made it so the enemy has to retreat to their side. Like, yes, it sucks, you're gonna die, but this gave your team more space to push other lanes. If nobody on the team takes any risks, nobody will ever do anything. Then suddenly your team also can't farm because the enemy is just like controlling everything. But by you taking the risk and pushing the walker and hopefully forcing multiple people of the enemy team back, suddenly you give your team more openings to push other lanes to get other objectives. Every rank up until Phantom, this is the main mistake I see people do. Try to look for favorable traits. Maybe you have 2 or 3 people pushing and getting a pick off on the enemy, right? Get some comeback gold. Take risks. Which leads me to tip number 4, which is the complete opposite. Playing too risky when you're ahead. Let's say you start the laning stage, you kill every single one of the enemy's towers, right? Maybe you even have walkers down and you had like 20k, right? Or like 15k. A lot of people, when they're ahead, try to force the issue more and more, right? They go for more objectives, they go for risky 1 versus 2 plays, which may work out, right? You're ahead in money, and they play aggressive, but this is the only way you can lose as the winning team. So the more you are ahead, the safer you should play. Why? Because if the enemy kills you once, they probably get like double the gold because of comeback gold. How do you play from if you're ahead? You push the lanes out as long as they're safe, and then you just farm. Then you're allowed to farm. You can farm safely. Pick safe options, pick safe pushes, but do not overcommit and don't give the enemy any openings to come back. The more you are ahead, the safer you should play, and the more you are behind, the more risky you need to play. Otherwise, there's no way of you winning. Every time I say this, it sounds very simple, but it's such an obvious mistake. And after this, I'll go over a replay real quick, and we'll look at a few examples of this, okay? Number 5, this is a high rank mistake. Committing too many people to a specific team fight. Let's go back into a random scenario. Let's say the enemy has a McGinnis, right, or a Wraith, and they're really annoying at split pushing. Let's say they see the enemy McGinnis walking down the lane, and the icon is right here. This is where McGinnis is. What the average higher ranked player does is, let's kill this guy, right? So they send multiple people to rotate over to kill, right? And let's say there's like 2 people sitting around green, and there's another person sitting around yellow, and then there's another person that's in spawn that just respawned, and they all collapse and kill the McGinnis really easily when he shows up like under the walker, right? Like the McGinnis gets a tiny bit of damage under the walker, but you kill him instantly. Is that a good trade for you? No, because of simple math. You're committing 4 people's time, right, to kill 1 person on the other team. Right? And even if you kill them almost instantly, and yes, it's great that you defended the walker, this is not worth it. Why? The gold you're getting is you're gonna get gold from 1 McGinnis, right? So depending on how farmed he is, even if he's very farmed, so 1 person gets a kill gold and 3 people get the assist, which is almost nothing. And you invested like, let's say half a minute or up to a minute to even get there to push out, like to kill that McGinnis. This is like, overall, it's not a lot of dollars. It's very small. It's very small. Like, yeah, you got a kill, and yeah, you feel good about yourself. Like, woo, look at us, guys. We killed a McGinnis, 4 versus 1. That's to be expected, right? What happens during that time, if the enemy team is good? What happens during this time, the 30 seconds to a minute that you took killing the McGinnis? The enemy has, 4 to 5 other players that suddenly push this lane, right? Push this lane. Maybe there's 1 guy that walks into your jungle and farms the jungle. So if you compare the money that you just got from killing this 1 McGinnis and compared to the value that the enemy team is getting from pushing the lane, right? Like, you might even lose a walker, but let's assume you don't even lose a walker. The money these 4 to 5 players get from farming every lane and farming your jungle is going to be way more than the money you got from killing this 1 McGinnis. What does that mean in practice? What should you actually do? Your response to the enemy needs to be efficient. This is assuming the person has like around the normal net worth, okay? If the enemy has 1 person pushing, you should respond with a maximum of 3 people. And that's the absolute maximum. Ideally, you want to respond with 1 to 2 people, okay? Because let's assume you are defending under your walker. The walker is going to help you. Walker does give you a resist bonus, if you don't know, if you're under the walker. So it's going to be very hard for him to take the walker in a 1v1 already. Right? Assuming around the same net worth. Even if he has more net worth than you respond with a maximum of 2 people. Most people play it safe. They're too scared to take actual fair 1v1s, or they're too scared to take challenging fights, so they go back to just guaranteeing teamfight victories. And it sounds nice, right? Like, oh, we got a kill. But what did you invest? Right? So with 1 to 2 people, you should very easily be able to thwart the McGinnis away, push him away, or get the kill. And with 3 people, you almost always need the kill, otherwise you fucked up, but never more than that, even if they're ahead in your net worth. Let's go over a few other examples, right? Like, what do you do when the people pushes with 2? You want to respond with like 2 to 4. You can calculate this up, right? Like, if the enemy pushes with 3, then you respond with like 3 to 5, right? And then if the enemy pushes with 4, this is like where you can start considering sending the entire team. Even with 3, you can start considering sending the entire team. If you can guarantee the teamfight win, because suddenly 3 people on the enemy team are dead, and then you can take a free mid boss, for example, right? That's like a huge swing, right? But my point is more so about fights where the enemy doesn't really commit a lot of people, where they commit 1 to 2 people max. Do not commit more than a few people. Next video, I will go over a replay of mine, or multiple, because I see this all the time and it pisses me off, because I'm that Wraith pushing, right? And I'm not giving you this info because I'm pissed, but I'm that Wraith pushing, and every time I get to their walker, like, yeah, they defend it, they kill me, but they have like 4 to 5 people there, right? And then, meanwhile, my team takes the entire rest of the map and we win. And I sit there like, oh, guess that was a fun game. I died 5 times, 10 times, but, but my team won really easily because I did the correct thing. Which brings me to my final point, or I guess a bonus point, right? Because we're already at 5. KD doesn't matter. Kills and deaths do not matter. Let's say you have 2 people. One of them is a 0 and 5 player, right? And the other player is like he has 2 kills, like 0 deaths, right? Is this player always worse than this player? No, not necessarily. Let's say the player that is 0-5 ended up killing like 2 walkers for the 5 lives is worth way more than the person that's 2 and 0 and just spent the entire map in your jungle, right? And farmed your jungle, right? So the person that is like 2 and 0, they probably didn't really take a lot of risks. They perma spammed the map. They probably have a high net worth and they farmed a lot of jungle camps. But they probably only got those kills by like people like pushing in, overcommitting, which is fine, don't get me wrong. But you can very easily end up with kills in this game or assists while not really achieving anything of anything of value. Whereas the player that is 0 and 5 might have gone 0-5 by pushing into the walker, dying, pushing in again, right? Killing the walker, like finishing it off and then dying again. Suddenly he's 0-2, right? But he got a walker. Worth in most cases. Do not worry about KD. I know you want to stay alive and I know you want to feel cool and I know you want to like make your score look good. Trust me, in the long run, you will climb and your score is going to look good on average if you follow all these principles I just gave you. Don't be scared to be like, oh, this walker is low, but there's 4 people coming. But I know I can kill the walker. If you know you can kill the walker and you know there's 4 people coming on the enemy team, you go for that walker every time. You die for your team. You're the hero. You know? You're the player that your teammates don't deserve. Because you know if you get that walker, you open up the map, you give your team a flex slot potentially, you give your team extra gold, right? And 1 death for that, while the enemy has to commit multiple people, right, to finish you off after you kill the walker, is always worth it. And yep, that's about it. That was a lot of yapping. And I feel like I could have explained this better. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments. But I do feel really strongly about this. Again, I'll try to answer everything on this video. If anything was unclear, let me know. If you disagree, give me your thoughts. Please, give me your insight. Just think about basic math. Think about what is worth it. And don't worry too much about how much money you have. And don't worry too much about your KD, basically. And don't be scared to take small skirmishes. Don't be scared to take 1v1s, 2v1s, etc. Because you will improve. Even if your micro is bad and you end up losing a lot of 1v1s, in the long run, you'll get better. You'll get better at fighting and you will climb in the long run, right? It might not be instant gratification, but it will make you a better player the more you use those principles to win. If you never take any risks, you'll never be a good rank in this game. If you're that type of person that sits in their own jungle for 4, 5, 20 minutes and gets all the money and has the highest net worth on the team, and then you blame your team for losing, there is a good chance you are actually the reason your team is losing. Because while you have been farming the entire time, your team was down 1. They've been struggling pushing out lanes, right? The enemy might have taken a lot of your walkers just because you weren't there to defend, right? The enemy team might be ahead in gold massively because you took all the jungle farm, your team couldn't farm anything and they just kept dying over and over. The enemy team might be ahead because you never pushed out to get that free walker. You never got the flex slot. That's about it. I hope that was helpful. And until next time, see you friends. Bye bye.